I think we're going to be introduced, so everybody hold tight just for another minute. We've got one more panelist coming, and I think Elaine is introducing us, and then we'll get going here. Hi, lovely. Hi, Mucai.
Hi.
All right. I don't see Elaine, so I'll kick us off. My name is Deborah, and I love supply chain. In fact, it gets me out of bed nice and early in the morning. I'm currently on the West Coast of the United States. It is 3:30 in the morning here. But I cannot be more excited about the panelists that we have today. We are going to explore circularity, and it's our path to a sustainable future. And the circular economy, of course, is the concept that materials have a lot of value to give to our economy. We're not fully utilizing all of that value today. And done properly, we can create jobs, elongate our supply chains, as in the longevity of those supply chains, and of course, the success of our operations. So together today, we're going to explore this concept. We're going to cover two major topics. We're first going to talk about the need to stop planning, stop making business cases, and really start moving into taking action. What can we do to get started today to take our operations more circular? The second topic we'll cover is around what we're calling the first mover disadvantage, and we'll explore this topic a little bit, that just getting started sometimes can come with some risks to our companies. So we're going to kick off this panel with the panelists, please introducing all of yourselves, and in one sentence, share what circularity means for you. Sheri, can you kick us off, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sheri Hinish, and I also love supply chain like Deborah. I also love sustainability and circular economy and diversity and inclusion. So I'm super excited to be here today and hopefully tie some of these concepts together. Circularity to me means that we walk on a restorative path that maximizes the potential in all things: life, people, materials, nature, and technology. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Welcome. Iñigo, can you please introduce yourself and give one sentence on what circularity means to you?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Iñigo Canalejo. I am Sustainability Director for CHEPS in the region, CHEP and Brambles. Basically, we are the largest reusable packaging company in the world. We help move more products to more people than any other company in the world, and we do this in a sustainable way. Our customers share and reuse our platforms, our products across the supply chain, and this reduces, obviously, the need for new raw materials, natural resources, and the generation of waste. So we're actually a living example of a circular economy business model operating at a global scale. And if I had to choose one sentence, that's a tough one, but probably I would say doing more with less. That is all around the circular economy, right? How can we decouple the relationship between economic and social growth from the use of natural resources?
Perfect. Thank you. Welcome. Mucai, please.
All right, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mucai Kunyiha. I'm the chairman of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers based in Nairobi, Kenya. And I also operate a business which is in agricultural inputs called CKL Africa Limited. We do a lot of work around sustainability with our membership. We've got members across 14 sectors, and I've been championing that in the association for a while now. Circularity, in a sentence for me, is how do we optimize the use of resources in a resource-challenged world, and more specifically for us, in a resource-challenged continent. Thanks, Deborah.
Lovely. Welcome. And Anton, please.
Hi everyone. I'm Anton Coetzee. I work for a company called Relog in South Africa, and we are supply chain consulting firm and infrastructure design. And in our designs, we always have sustainability and green designs at top of mind, and always trying to get the best and most out of optimized operations, specifically distribution infrastructure. And to me, circular supply chain is blowing life into used toys and getting the most out of everything that we can do. And it needs to become a lifestyle, and I think something we need to follow. And the linear economy should be something we actually frown upon going forward.
Lovely, thank you. Welcome. All right, let's get started. So our first topic, like I mentioned, is this idea that we can start taking action today. Sheri, you host a podcast called The Supply Chain Revolution, and you've mentioned that recently a guest has shared with you a sentiment that it's really time to let's stop worrying about this business case. It's there, it's been made, and move into taking action. Can you share parts of that discussion and your thoughts on it, please?
Sure. So I actually have a couple guests that shared a point of view tied to your question, Deborah. Dr. Gary Cooper from Reaply, he's the CEO of Reaply, and then also John Holm, who is at Pixera Global. And I want to frame these insights in an overarching concept called incrementalism, and that's what we discussed in preparing for this session. So this is the belief in or advocacy of change by degrees. Gradual small changes. And this is by and large the transition from a linear economy to a sustainable economy. So the problem with incrementalism is that we end up iterating in a bad system. And as John Holmes says, there are really no good choices in a bad system, only choosing between less bad. So I want everyone to ask yourself, why do we keep pushing a sustainable business agenda when what we really need is a circular economy, an economy where everyone can participate, including folks that are left behind in a linear world? And I think, one thing that's been teased out of all the episodes this year is that we have a chance to leapfrog in certain parts of the world where incrementalism is ripe for disruption. And I believe that Africa can lead the way. So back to your question, why do we keep pushing the business case? So this is from Dr. Gary Cooper. The business case is the biggest marketplace that I know, and that's Earth. Climate change is the number one risk facing businesses and our survival, according to WEF. Are we going to wait until we literally can't walk outside and breathe? What's the ROI on breathable air? Have we gotten so far away from the concept of doing good that now it has to be justified? Black Lives Matter, exploiting communities that are already marginalized people. That's wrong. Why do we need a business case for doing the right thing? And I think when it comes to circularity, that's what we're going to unpack today. We're going to unpack the right thing. And the last point that I want to highlight is that in order to make the circular economy real, it has to operate with the leave no one behind mantra. And this means tri-sector partnerships and collaboration. So that collaboration at the local community level is critical. And this is less about someone else coming in and prescribing transition, but communities, African communities, owning this and leading this change. Thank you.
Lovely, and I'll ask for more responses for that in just a moment. Mucai, you have spoken about the multi-stakeholder environment within these communities that's required for the transition to a circular economy. Can you share your ideas for collaboration across these complex stakeholder environments, please?
Yeah, thanks, Deborah. I think obviously circularity is a response to the environmental and climate change challenge that we all face in the world. And I think the starting point is for us to all admit that we are part of the problem, as well as hopefully part of the solution. And we are part of the problem because, we are consumers and we are beneficiaries. So if we take like plastics, which we did a lot of work on in Kenya, we're all taking in the plastic. We buy the food, we buy the shampoo, and we want all of those things because so I'm not quite a believer that we necessarily want to go back to living, basic lives where we just bathed by the river and covered ourselves in leaves, or whatever else. People, we've gotten used to all this sophistication and we enjoy it, but then we know it's not sustainable. So how can we marry this? So, and not only are we beneficiaries, but we are also influencers because all the pressure we're getting, all the what the public thinks about the environment, the climate change activism, the people who are participating. It's us again. So the solutions lie with us, and we need everybody together. And it is in everybody's interest to have this conversation. But the challenge always has been is how do we get all these people together at one table and have a conversation? Because on one hand, and I come from a manufacturing background, we have demonstrations on the environment. So it's a demonstration out there, and we are sitting in our boardroom trying to go through our business plan and whatnot. How are we going to be able to have this conversation? Governments, on the other hand, are worried about the environment. They're having all these conversations, COP21 and so on, and responding to that pressure and doing their own thing, whether it's regulating. In Africa, we've had I'd say the misfortune, our governments tend to be a little bit more authoritarian, so they just throw out regulations and rules and say, now you're going to follow these rules, whether they are practical or real or not. So that becomes, again, a challenge. And then, of course, there are manufacturers, and I think there's a lot of supply chain people over here who are thinking about, we've got to make a profit. We are a business. What's this going to cost us? How are we going to get around this? Because, it's their end year target, quarter target. How are we going to get around this? And I think that's one of the great inventions, or I think one of the benefits of circularity, is that it gives us a space and a language where all these parties can come together and have a conversation. Because it's the conversation is things that we can all agree on. So it's a nice space where we can all come in, have a good conversation. The environmentalists, we say about we want to conserve resources. We want to make sure the resources we know they are not infinite. We need to conserve them and reuse them and so on, keep them going. And that's a conversation they can engage in. So they can come in. When we talk about from business, we talk about you can save money. You can save cost. You can innovate. There's opportunity to innovate and do new things. And you can create jobs. And immediately we say jobs, the government is here and all regulators are in and they're like, yes, let's create jobs. Let's innovate. That's conversation. So circularity is a great table around which we can have a conversation and make a change for the environment, like we say, because we need to make those changes. But first, we need to be all at the same table and have that conversation, because it's going to affect all of us in how we consume. Our behavior needs to change in how we actually regulate and how we source our products and how we manufacture. So thanks. Yeah, that's my bit on multi-stakeholders.
I love that. Especially as we're coming up to American Thanksgiving this week, we're thinking a lot about tables and who's a responsible attendee at our tables in our country right now. But I love that idea of having circularity as the table that brings us all together, and I will start framing it like that, and I will give you credit. Iñigo, as we think about all coming to the table together, one of the challenges that you have explored before is, in order to have these meaningful conversations and move forward together, we need to have some level of standardization. If I say A, do you understand that it's the same A, for example? And this is somehow preventing us as a community from taking steps forward today. Can you expand a little bit on that, share some examples, and potentially a recommendation or two on how we move forward?
Certainly, yeah. I think standardization is a key enabler of the circular economy, especially if you want to do it at a large scale, right? So in order for people to come together into that table, you need to set the right standards for it to work, right? So we need to basically integrate the circular economy into the design principles of products, services, and supply chains, right? And this doesn't really happen that way today. Products are not made to be refurbished, dismantled. Products are not made to last, actually. They're quite the opposite. A lot of the products are actually made to break down. No? So the more standards that you have in an industry, obviously the easier this transition to the circular economy. And I'll give you a good example on that. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation estimated that if mobile phones were made using standard processes, that they would be made in a way that they can be dismantled in a standard way, if the, let's say, key components were standard components like screens, cameras, batteries, etc., the cost of refurbishing a mobile phone would be reduced by 50%. So again, imagine the facilitation that creates in order for products actually, to have an extended, 1, 2, 3 more lives in the market. And what our company does, what CHEP does is probably a great example on the importance that standardization plays in making this at a large scale. So our customers share and reuse our platforms in the supply chain in wide, let's say, ranges of different supply chains, and it's end-to-end as well, from the beginning of the supply chain until the end of the supply chain. So our products are standard with regards to the size and the materials, but everything else around the supply chain needs to be standard as well for companies to be able to reuse these products in the supply chain. So anything going from a forklift truck, obviously, to the warehouse, to the truck size where the pallets go into, even to automated warehouses that are being developed now, they need to be done in a standard way for the system to work. If everybody had their own standard of building warehouses, of building trailers, forklift trucks, there would be no opportunity for these products to be reused in the economy, let's say, in the supply chain. So our products can be used today by Unilever, tomorrow they would be reused by Pick and Pay, and the day after they can be reused by RCL Foods, right? And it's all because the whole supply chain shares the same standard. So I think obviously that is a critical component. And if a product is not standard, it is very difficult, a product or beyond the product, not the infrastructure. It is very difficult for the circular economy to thrive, especially at this large scale.
Starting to get after my heart here on how we think about circular supply chains and what does it even mean? And I'm not sure as a community we're even clear on, would we all describe a circular supply chain the same way? And then I'm reminded, frankly, we don't all describe supply chains the same way. So I think there's a lot of rich conversation here, and we'll come back to this. Anton, let's hear from you. You've shared that behavior changes are needed across the value chain, and those should be done because it's the right thing to do. So we're going to loop back, Sheri, to what you have kicked us off with today. It's not always about the money. Sometimes it's about the right thing to do. Can you share a couple of these behavior changes that we need to see, certainly from the consumer side, but also as we think about designing and maintaining, operating our supply chains?
Sure, thanks, Deborah. To change people's behaviors, it can be a very slow process, and it talks to Sheri's incrementalism. So it requires a lot of change management and convincing that people are doing the right thing. And sometimes it's difficult since the strategy is long-term and people are looking for instant gratification. So you really need to sketch a very vivid and clear picture to all parties involved to actually get that behavioral change happening. And I think in order to progress to more sustainable actions, we need to go and look at the supply chain as a whole. I believe that sustainability can be driven up the supply chain all the way from the consumer back to where we source our raw materials. And if consumers can change behavior and insist on recycled packaging or no packaging at all in some instances, it forces retailers to sell what the customer wants. And that means that potentially we need to rethink what the customers want and how we can offer it to them. But in the same breath, I think it's each step in the supply chain must actually work just closely with the next step in the supply chain, one up and one down, and hopefully that can converge to a single strategy and focus. And unfortunately, we are selfish human beings and we've got selfish strategies, so it is difficult to align the entire supply chain to that one focused goal. And I think that's where circular economy needs to come in, as it needs to entail the whole supply chain. So it's difficult to say it's not always about the money. A great deal of the world cannot afford it. However, it must then be somehow subsidized by regulation and laws to drive this behavior change, and saying no to non-sustainable practices in light of the bigger and the longer term picture that we're trying to achieve. And if behavior can't be regulated, then you need to somehow make it affordable to your consumers to actually be able to afford it. And that means that you as a company to absorb that cost and make it green for the rest of the world. And I think also COVID to some extent have also put us one step back a bit in terms of the amount of waste that we've been generating. Everyone looking for individual packed goods, and trying to keep everything clean and non-contaminated. So in some extent, I think we need to reinforce that behavior once again, and to remind people that we're sitting with finite resources and we need to change our behavior.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, so now a couple of additional questions and follow-on from what I have heard you say. We've got this tension between strategy is long-term, but people are wanting these short-term returns. How do I feel benefit in this quarter that I'm functioning in right now? We take that in combination with incrementalism is not going to be sufficient. And then we compare that to a highly complex stakeholder environment. So Mucai, maybe I'll start with you, and then Sheri would like your thoughts as well, and we'll go from there. So Mucai, how do we balance this as you work across all the different organizations you're working across? How do we boost them forward a bit more?
Yeah, I guess it's the big question around some of these big changes that we need to make. But perhaps supply chains are very, very complex. And like Anton mentioned, getting people to change, it's also, your suppliers. How are you going to get your suppliers to change? How are you going to get your consumers to change? And, people are worried about being the first on stage to do something, because it's like, will my consumers buy it? So if I have a supermarket and I say now, I'm not going to be packaging the vegetables, you have to bring your own bags, will the consumers come, or will they walk to the supermarket next door? So we are caught in between that thing and it was what I was talking about earlier. We all have to move together. If we don't move together, it's very difficult in different pockets to try and move on your own. And so that complication is what makes it difficult. But I think the first thing is to engage, and probably is to say, like, events like this, it's in a sense peculiar that we talk about circular economy at a supply chain conference, not an environmental conference. So it is a topical issue now. So it's coming up. But, you look at the history of it, it's not a new subject. People in the 60s were talking about the environment and before. But it was kind of fringe. So it's coming up to the fore. And that is the beginning, I think, as everybody is talking about it. Then now what we need to do is just try and get those coalitions of people who want to make changes. But again, I think understand it's going to take us time, although we don't have time. We need to start, it's going to take us time, but we need to do it now. So we've got to have a sense of urgency. We do a lot of tree planting here, and the story is, or the quote is, the best time to plant a tree is 30 years ago. Okay, it was 30 years ago. The next best time is now. Yeah. Right. So it's about how do we do something now and start thinking through the entire supply chains, because I think the fact that we now have people thinking through the entire supply chain and not just maybe small aspects of it about where we're getting our power, how do we save energy and that kind of thing. Once we start that thinking, it gives us that opportunity to change. And I think to some extent, Sheri is right. There's a lot of things we can do very quickly that are not going to take, it doesn't take too much to do. You can actually do it very quickly. And those we should all do as quickly as we can. Yeah.
Super. So this idea of incrementalism around how do I save energy, how do I save water, instead we need to start thinking about circular across the entire supply chain. And as we make that switch, it'll feel more complete, more robust. Sheri, interested in your thoughts on this balance and this tension of how to show me right now my return versus 1% incrementalism might show us improvement in this quarter, but how do we help to shift away from and really move forward instead?
So when you think about shared responsibility, and I think that's how we're framing this due to the amount of collaboration that's needed to scale the circular economy, it's the concept of doing well and doing good. So making the fiscal argument for change, but then also, like I mentioned in my opening statement, we actually have to just do this because it's the right thing for humanity and our planet. What I find is, that short-term mindset, so quarter end, month end, year end, typically the ROI period is extended for sustainability initiatives. So you could take an 18-month to 24-month look or payback period. And we're just not used to that yet. With circularity, I think we might not have that tension. But when it comes to scaling beyond the pilot stage, then that's where it gets a little bit more complex, as the panelists have mentioned. So long-term value creation, this is sustained competitive advantage, right? So it's not just something that can typically be outsourced to a third party. This is something that's unique to your brand, your organization, your trading partners, and it's the ability to create network-based stewardship. So it really is, like everyone has described, supply chains being the conduit for change. Each person, each stakeholder across all nodes holding hands, and they're achieving these goals together, because you can't optimize in a silo. You know, this will not scale unless everyone participates in a meaningful way, and they have that North Star. That North Star, I think we're going to talk about in the next question, the SDGs, leading with purpose into a purpose economy, and then also knowing that we have to get in the canoe, people. What are you waiting for?
Sheri steering, everyone in. Here we go. Perfect. All right, thank you. And as you say, we are going to move on to our second topic. So this first topic is all about, let's just get going. There's a lot more we can share about this on how best we do that, et cetera. And man, if we had more time, we would certainly dive into those. But we're going to move into the second idea around this first mover disadvantage. Mucai, you started talking about this a little bit in the disadvantage on first mover. Keen, if you could share maybe an example of how this impacts. So for example, with the dozens or hundreds of manufacturing sites that you help to advise and guide, what is it? How do we help to de-risk this idea of these first few that take the first steps? How do we share that they did not, in fact, fall off a cliff and they have been successful? How do we get those that encouragement for the more conservative decision makers who aren't willing to take these risky first moves that can cause these disadvantages for us? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think actually what stops people getting onto the canoe, that's another nice line, is the fear. You know, is this going to sink, or are we going to, you want to row out there into the lake? It seems on our own, it just seems a little bit scary going out there. But I think that's been changing now, and that's great, because right now, you know, everybody's getting onto the canoe. So it's easy for you. You know, if you start talking about environmentalism, sustainability, and so on, at least people understand what you're talking about. So that's great. But obviously, at a place like this on supply chains, everybody's thinking about the cost. Because is this going to cost me more? And if it costs me more, it's going to be a problem for my business, my market share, you know, just the normal metrics that we are measured on in a business. So how are we going to be able to do this? And of course, in some instances, you can't even find the partners. I think, like it was mentioned earlier, who's going to do this for me? And I think, well, now there are businesses, like Iñigo said, and Anton can advise you. There are places you can get this, but sometimes you just can't find the people who are going to help you build a circularity, either bringing you in material that is recycled at a proper level, or taking your waste or whatever you'd consider waste. You know, I think taking the circularity of bringing back raw materials, I think it still becomes a big issue. So we've got to work on this together, and that's what one of the benefits of associations like we have at the Association of Manufacturers is bringing in people together so that you can have the conversation and make those linkages. Again, probably at a conference like this is you meet the people, make the connections, and you can then start finding somebody who will do something for you and move along. So you can't do it alone. It's finding the partnership and finding good platforms that will help us. On the other hand, we also need to get consumers on board and to accept the changes that are going to be necessary, because it's not going to be easy. I think, let's say in Kenya, for instance, we were all used to getting shopping bags, plastic bags at the supermarket. When you went there, they'd give you bags and you did whatever you did with them. Now we don't have them. So you have to remember to carry your bag. So you're going to have to buy one. And we now remember to carry our bags. We always have them in our car. Okay, it's a bit of it's not what it was before. It's a bit less comfortable, but come on, it's just putting a bag in your car. How difficult is that? Okay, it's not that hard. So it changes a few things, but we can still do it and move on. And then finally, I think where we are still having some challenges is with regulation and government. Because even though government wants to move things and change things, for instance, in Kenya, we are still working around what kind of plastic, what can you use recycled plastic for? What is food grade recycled plastic? And what are the processes it needs to go for? So there is also a regulatory aspect where we need to make sure that the law and all our regulation is all around, and all the standards we've had is all around a linear economy. We need to start moving them towards a circular economy so that they have those aspects in them. And then that way we'll be able to, Thanks.
Perfect. Quite a bit to unpack there. And so I'll come back to a couple of points you've made. But the first one, if I think about the plastic bag of the supply chain, it's really the pallet. It used to be that the only option was you get a reusable pallet. You ship something, a pallet is supplied, and you don't have to deal with it. You don't have to put the pallet in the car. Now we have an option that's the reusable bag. So Iñigo, I'm really keen to hear from you. CHEP has already done this. There is no more business case. You're currently functioning globally with reusable pallets. You've taken the plunge. You're being successful. You're going to build additional services out around this. Can you talk through those initial steps of entering into a new market, bringing on new customers, the transition that they feel on any fear in switching away from their reusable or their throwaway bags to reusable bags with the pallet?
Yeah, happy to compare our pallet with a plastic bag, but only if it's reusable. If not, single use, definitely not a good comparison. But yes, obviously, in order for our model to work, we need an infrastructure, let's say, they're set up in place, and we need scale. And it is true that, when we expand in the new territories, sometimes if it's a developed economy, then the infrastructure, the supply chain infrastructure is already there. Let's assume. So the processes, the systems, the standardization is already there. And therefore it's all around, expanding the network and bringing companies together to collaborate on expanding the solution. The biggest challenge is working in countries or regions that are not as developed, because there you have two challenges. On the one hand is you have a developing infrastructure that requires, further modernization, and then you need to generate the scale as well. So in order for us to do that, my three takeaways that I would share with everybody is that the first one, it would be basically around standardization, as I mentioned before. The sooner you can standardize, the better, because then from that standard, then the whole supply chain will build on. The longer it takes you to, harmonize the processes, the systems, etc., then the longer the conversion to the circular economy is going to be. The second point is around collaboration. And look, Mucai already mentioned how important it is to bring all of the stakeholders together. Usually, we don't do things on our own. When we enter a new market, we usually do it through or in partnership with one of our customers that is also entering a market or is also already present in that market. And obviously we use the expertise, and that's probably, rather than a disadvantage, is a first mover advantage, because obviously we have a track record of doing it in other places. So we use that expertise, obviously with the local knowledge, to be able to scale it at that local country, let's say. And then the third point, and again, very much in line with what has been already said, is around the long term. Look, this is not something that is going to happen tomorrow. This is something that takes time. Changing the supply chain in countries like India or in China is not going to happen on one day to the other. So we need to be very patient. And that's where that balance comes. And even for a company like ours, when we've been doing this, for many years, that's a challenge at the end. When we think about our P&L and the investments we need to make, thinking about our return in 10, 20, 30 years, because that's how much, how long this takes. And the approach we usually take there is, again, to start small. So we don't, start a whole operation in China by trying to cover the whole geography. We first start with one customer doing, small flows, then we expand it to another customer, maybe to another region, another warehouse, maybe, a different city. Again, no, we try to expand it in a gradual way, so that it's manageable already, also from the, financial point of view. I think that's really important.
Very cool. I'm thinking about the parallels of using resources and materials like different metals as you're thinking about entering a market and reusing the flows in one area and then expanding. And you've got me thinking on that. Anton, would like to hear from you. So sometimes decisions are taken by a consumer or customer, and sometimes it's by a supplier. The example you have shared earlier as we were preparing for this panel is that while some consumers bring their own bag, we come back to the bags again, it's more efficient for the retailer just to stop giving them for free. So a choice made by a consumer versus a forced choice. And my own personal choice, my personal perspective is that widespread change in the circular economy will not come from changing consumer behavior. It will change based on the system that we build. Back to Sheri's earlier point that there's no good decisions in a bad system. Can you share your thoughts on, from a supply chain perspective, what are some of those forcing functions that we could do throughout the supply chain? One example might be to say, hey, customer, as your supplier, I now use CHEP pallets. You're going to need to use CHEP pallets. This is how you're going to do business with me. Can you think of some ways that we could change the behavior throughout the supply chain?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually interesting, the whole journey of plastic bags. I know we keep on going back to this, but usually we always got the bags for free. Then actually we started paying for bags. And now a lot of the retailers from their side are actually saying, we don't want to offer you any more bags and you have to bring your own, as Mucai has said. And that's good to see that it isn't a consumer-driven thing necessarily. It is also up the street, and they're also willing to make those ends meet. But some of the difficult things, though, is that all of this obviously requires, it's a cost and investment, and it's always difficult to ascertain where do you push these costs? Do you push it onto the consumer, or do the companies absorb that cost in the bigger picture, saying that we want to be the body of a circular supply chain, or just a greener supply chain? And so it's that very difficult thing. And if you pass on the cost to the consumer, they might go to the next guy who hasn't gotten to that step. And it talks about the first mover disadvantage that you've spoken to Mucai about, is that those first guys might lose out on a bit of sales because they were actually the first people to move, which is sort of actually crazy, because you're meant to be supporting that. So and that's the part of call it the consumer behavior. If we then also look at the companies need to obviously also invest in research and development, and that now speaks to what Iñigo says. It's and also contrary to what Sheri wants in terms of things happening now. That there is it takes time to research and develop things and actually make it worthwhile for the companies. Unfortunately, they're not going to dish out their funds and lose out on profits necessarily just for making the steps immediately. It is a research and a development thing, and I think that's where companies need to now is the time to do that, is to increase their budgets for research and development and change that behavior of saying, well, let's put a lot bigger focus on the sustainability and make it work for the whole supply chain, and share those costs somehow and make it paint the picture that we need to do this for the entire world.
Right.
And then finally, I think is what also I think Mucai has also touched on. It's you can only go so far with the consumer, but at some point, I think regulation and laws is going to be the way that things are changed. And I think that the governing bodies that drive these terms of sustainability and so on need to focus on that and put some infrastructure changes in place to support this whole drive. It's not a matter of just laying down the law and saying you must do this, but there's not been a bigger picture behind it and how do we actually how do we actually action this, and how do we make it consumer friendly to actually abide by all these laws? I mean, you might have a bit of a uprising from consumers if you can't meet their demands as well. So it's once again, it's that symbiotic relationship between consumers and suppliers, and just finding that sweet spot, and making that change together, and saying, yes, we're going to work towards this goal. And I think that's the behavior that we need to see changing.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So we've had some really interesting different opinions actually about, we've been talking about the planet for a long time. It's become more normalized. And in the same way, we're still not taking care of the planet. So there obviously are some speed bumps here. So Sheri, would love to hear from you. When you think about social responsibility, what can we learn from the shifts in the last years towards social responsibility, and apply it to circularity, or whatever it is that we're going to end up calling a circular economy? It may not be the same name, but this idea of doing good because it's the right thing to do. Any lessons we can glean from shifts you've seen happen in the last, let's say, 10 years?
Sure. So circular economy and corporate social responsibility, they are interconnected concepts. And when we say CSR, in my opinion, we're talking about accountability and transparency into business operations that impact the world we share and the communities where a business operates in that end-to-end breadth of supply chain. And this translates into CSR reporting and some of the ESG disclosures tied to corporate investment, supply chain sustainability, ethical sourcing, diversity, equity, and inclusion reporting, and so on. And this sort of pressure to report and be held accountable gives broader stakeholders visibility into stewardship and shared responsibility, which I talked a little bit about before. So this frames an opportunity for circular economy objectives to operate in the same way by identifying, measuring, standardizing, and communicating actions. And this, in my opinion, I think tying them to the 2030 vision, the Sustainable Development Goals, is another opportunity. As more companies adopt the SDGs globally, circularity is tucked under SDG 12. But through these discussions, and for anyone who doesn't know what SDG 12, it's responsible production and consumption. So this is the life breath of supply chains. We're able to touch the broad vision to change the world that we share. We're talking about building gender equity, sustainable communities, reducing poverty and hunger. And, when you think about social responsibility, we're actually able to empower families to earn a decent wage and in turn potentially use that money to educate our youth. We're improving life on land, life underwater, and we're doing this all through partnerships, as the panelists have described. So this is the interconnected vision that can be realized through circularity and supply chains.
We need supply chains.
They power the world.
Perfect. I think that's lovely. Amazingly, we have just 2 minutes left, so I'm going to make a very difficult challenge to each of you to give us a 20-second closing thought on one piece of advice for taking the next step to take your operations more circular. So very briefly, Anton, one closing thought from you, please. And you're on mute.
Thank you, Deborah. Sorry, I've just used my 20 seconds there. I think, in short, I think we need to get into this boat. We need to get there together. We need change all across the supply chain. We need immediate behavior change, and increase your budgets to sustainability and moving to a circular economy.
Perfect. Sheri, one piece of advice.
So everyone, this is an inflection point, and the power of one person doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time can be the greatest influence in our society and in our world. And mobilizing one to many through collaboration can be transformative. We've designed our way into this and we can design our way out of it. So please get started.
Perfect. Iñigo.
Sure. From my side, yeah, let's get started. And I think the key there is, look, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think the circular economy has been around for centuries. We just didn't call it that way back then. So look for pockets of excellence, areas in your business where you are already doing things around the circular economy, and then look to scale them up. And then obviously partnership to me is a key component here. Collaborate with other like-minded, even competitors, let's say that, here in sustainability, thank God, competition is not even present, right? It's not a word that we discuss. So just collaborate with any partner that you see an opportunity to drive further initiatives.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And Mucai, final closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think for Africa, we can't afford not to go circular. We can't afford any waste. We can't afford the joblessness. We can't afford to avoid the innovation. We're going through a pandemic, a big economic shock. Literally, we have to start changing the way we do things. And this is our opportunity. If we've been left behind in the industrial revolution, we can be ahead in the circular revolution. This is our chance. Thanks.
Amazing. We can be ahead in the circular revolution. Thank you, panelists, for your perspectives and your time. Thank you, audience, for sticking around with us and listening to these ideas for change. And this closes our panel. Please enjoy the rest of the conference today, and thank you for attending.